The knock came at 6:14 the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been watching the clock on my truck's dashboard for the past hour, counting down to when the McDonald's on 5th would open so I could use their bathroom to wash my face without someone calling the police on me. 63 years old, sitting in the cab of a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked windshield and a passenger seat buried under 2 duffel bags and a box of tools that no longer belonged to any job site, and the only thing I had to look forward to was a sink with warm water. The flashlight hit my window before I heard the footsteps. I rolled it down slowly. The deputy was young, couldn't have been more than 28 with that careful look cops get when they haven't decided yet if they're talking to a threat or a tragedy. "Morning, sir. You been here all night?" "Just passing through," I said. It was what I always said. He asked for my license and registration. I handed them over without argument. I'd learned there was no point. When you're an old man sleeping in a parking lot off Route 9 November, argument only makes things worse. He walked back to his cruiser. I watched him in my side mirror, sitting there longer than a routine check should take. Then he got out, walked back to my window, and just stood there for a second looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Sir," he said, "can you tell me your mother's maiden name?" I hadn't heard that name in 31 years. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part that came before it. And the part that came before it started, like most disasters do, quietly. My name is Robert Hadley. I spent 32 years building a contracting business from nothing. Not a big company, 12 employees at our peak, mostly residential work in western Pennsylvania, the kind of work where you show up at someone's house, replace their roof or rebuild their deck, and they shake your hand at the end and mean it. I was good at it. More importantly, I loved it. There is a satisfaction in physical work that I have never been able to explain to people who haven't done it. You build something. It stands there. You can drive by it 20 years later, and it is still standing. My wife, I'll call her my wife even though she hasn't been that for 4 years, her name was Deborah. We met when I was 34 and she was 29. At a church fundraiser, her family organized every fall. She was smart and funny, and she had a way of making every room feel smaller in a good way, like the space compressed around her energy. I thought I was the luckiest man in Pennsylvania. Her brother was a family law attorney in Pittsburgh. His name was Gregory Marsh, and in 30 years of knowing him, I never once trusted him the way you're supposed to trust family. He had that quality some lawyers have where they listen to you very carefully and you realize, halfway through the conversation, that they aren't listening to understand you. They're listening to find the thing they can use. I told myself I was being uncharitable. Deborah loved her brother, so I kept quiet. For most of our marriage, things were fine. Not perfect, no marriage is, but good in the ways that matter. We raised 2 kids, both grown now. We had a house we'd paid off. I had the business, which by my late 50s had slowed down but was still turning a reliable profit. We had $340,000 in retirement accounts and another $60,000 in savings. Not wealthy by any standard, but solid. The kind of solid that took a lifetime to build. The cracks started showing when I was 60. I know now they had been there longer, but 60 was when I started seeing them. Deborah began spending more time in Pittsburgh. Her mother was getting older, she said. Blasken, her amble. He was a rise, mena Davidata. She wanted to be closer. I understood that. I suggested we move. She said no, she didn't want to uproot me from the business. Looking back, I understand what that meant. She wasn't thinking about uprooting me from anything. She was thinking about timing. Gregory began calling more often. Not to talk to me, to talk to her, but I'd answer the phone sometimes and hear his voice go flat when he realized it was me. Small thing. I filed it away. Then one evening in March, 4 years ago, Deborah sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me she wanted a divorce. I won't pretend I wasn't blindsided, because I was. I sat there for what felt like a full minute before I said anything. Not because I didn't have words, but because every word I could think of felt inadequate to the moment. "How long?" I asked. She looked at the table. "A while. Gregory's handling it," she said. And then she said the sentence that I have turned over in my mind 1,000 times since. I've already talked to him about the assets. The business, the retirement accounts, the house. He thinks we can keep this simple if you don't make it complicated. I don't make it complicated. That was the moment I should have walked out of that house and called a lawyer. Instead, I asked if she wanted to try counseling. She said no. I asked if there was someone else. She said that wasn't relevant. And God help me, I believed her, because I had spent 30 years believing Deborah, and some habits are harder to break than you think. I did not call a lawyer the next day. I called one 2 weeks later, after Gregory had already filed paperwork in Allegheny County, not our county being Westmoreland, using some provision his colleague had researched about venue selection. My lawyer, a good man named Phil Garrett, looked at the filing and let out a long breath through his nose. "They've been planning this," he said. "How long?" "Long enough to do it right," he said. "What happened over the next 8 months is the kind of thing that makes people stop believing the legal system works." Gregory moved assets through accounts I didn't know existed. He argued that the business had been declining, which it had, moderately, the way all construction businesses decline when the owner is getting older and thinking about retirement, and used that decline as evidence that my claimed value was inflated. He found a financial expert who testified that the business was worth $40,000. It was worth at least $280,000. I had quotes from 3 other appraisers. The judge, a man I had never met and will not name here, seemed to find Gregory's expert more persuasive. I came out of that divorce with $22,000. My truck, my tools, and a box of clothes. The house went to Deborah. The retirement accounts were split in a way that left me with less than a third. The business, my business, the one with my name on every contract, the one I had built with my hands for 32 years, was valued at $40,000, and half of that went to her as well. Phil Garrett told me I could appeal. I asked him how much it would cost. He told me. I looked at the $22,000 in my account and did the math. I drove out of Pittsburgh on a Tuesday in November, and I did not have a destination. I had a sister in Ohio, but she had her own problems, and I was too proud to show up at her door. I had friends, but they were the kind of friends you have in your 60s, the kind you have dinners with, not the kind you call when you're sleeping in your truck. So I slept in my truck. Not every night. Some nights I paid for a motel room when I could no longer stand the cold, or when I needed a shower badly enough to justify the $40. I found a gym in Uniontown that offered a 2-week trial membership, and I used it for 2 weeks and then paid month to month for 2 more months after that, going in at 6 in the morning to shower and pretend I was a person with somewhere to be. I tried to find work. I applied to hardware stores, home improvement chains, any place that might want a man with 32 years of construction knowledge. At 62, with a contracting license that had technically lapsed during the legal proceedings and a gap in my employment history that was hard to explain, I got a lot of very kind rejections. I got a few interviews that went nowhere. I got one callback from a Lowe's in Greensburg that turned into a 6-week seasonal position stocking shelves, and I took it because $22,000 does not last as long as you think it does when you are also paying for gas and food and the occasional motel room. By the following November, the November of the parking lot and the deputy, I had $840 in my account. I had stopped calling my kids. My son was in Denver, busy with his own life, his own family. I had told him about the divorce. I had not told him how bad things had gotten. My daughter was in North Carolina. Same story. I told myself I was protecting them. I know now I was protecting my pride, which is not the same thing and is considerably less valuable. The deputy was still standing at my window. "Your mother's maiden name, sir," he repeated. "Collier?" I said. "Margaret Collier?" "Why?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle, please." I had not done anything wrong. I knew I had not done anything wrong. But I am 63 years old, and I have watched enough news to know that knowing you haven't done anything wrong is not always enough, and my heart was going at a pace it had no business going. I stepped out. The cold came in immediately, the kind of November cold that has no patience. "I'm not arresting you," he said, quickly, like he could see what I was thinking. "There's a flag on your license, a federal locate flag. I need to make a call before I can explain it to you. Will you wait here?" He went back to his cruiser. I stood in the parking lot with my hands in my jacket pockets and watched a semi pull off the highway and into the lot and park, and the driver climb down and walk into the diner without looking at me, and I thought about what a federal flag even meant and came up with nothing useful. The deputy came back. He had his radio in his hand, and he looked at me differently now, in a way I could not immediately categorize. "Mr. Hadley," he said, "I need to give you a number to call." The number was for a law office in Philadelphia. Not Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. A firm called Whitmore and Associates that I had never heard of. The deputy wrote it on the back of a gas receipt from his car and handed it to me. "They've had a locate flag active on your license number for about 4 years, he said. "That's all I can tell you." I drove to that McDonald's and I sat in the parking lot and I looked at that number for a long time. There are moments in your life when you know, in some part of yourself you can't quite name, that what comes next is going to change things. I had felt it in the kitchen the night Deborah sat down across from me. I felt it now, differently. I called. A woman answered, professional and efficient. I gave her my name, and she put me on hold for less than 30 seconds before a man came on the line. Older voice. "Careful the way old lawyers are, careful, every word chosen." "Mr. Hadley," he said, "my name is Arthur Whitmore. I've been trying to find you for 4 years. My father's name was James Hadley. He died in 1991 when I was 29, and I attended his funeral and watched them lower him into the ground in a cemetery in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and I drove home and went back to work and tried not to think too much about the fact that we had never been close, my father and I. He left when I was 7. That is the simple version. The more complicated version is that he left my mother, a woman named Margaret Collier, from a small town outside Lancaster, and he went on to build a real estate development company in eastern Pennsylvania that became, over the following decades, quietly and substantially successful. He remarried. He had another family. He sent birthday cards until I was 12, and then he stopped. I saw him 4 times between the age of 12 and the day of his funeral, twice by accident. When he died, his second wife, a woman I had met exactly once, handled the estate. I was informed through a letter from an attorney that my father had left me a personal item, a watch, which arrived in the mail 2 weeks after the funeral in a small padded envelope with no note. I accepted this as a final summary of our relationship and moved on. What I did not know, what no one had told me, was that my father had also established a trust. Arthur Whitmore had been my father's attorney for the last 12 years of his life. He told me this carefully. In the way you explain something to someone who is about to need to sit down. The trust had been established in 1988, 3 years before my father died, with me as the sole beneficiary. It had been set up to activate on my father's death, at which point the trustee, a bank in Philadelphia, was supposed to locate me and notify me. The notification never came. My father's second wife had been aware of the trust. Arthur Whitmore was not willing to speculate, on the phone, about what had happened to that notification process. He said only that when he had been going through archival files 4 years ago, following the death of a colleague who had handled portions of the estate, he had found documentation suggesting the beneficiary me had never been properly notified. "The trust has been sitting," he said, "accruing for 33 years. I said something. I don't remember what it was. "Mr. Hadley, are you somewhere you can sit down?" "I'm in a parking lot," I said. A pause. "I see. Are you all right?" "I honestly don't know," I said. The original value of the trust in 1991 had been $340,000. My father had apparently been better at real estate than he had been at fatherhood. The trust had been conservatively but consistently invested by the bank in Philadelphia for 33 years through multiple market cycles because there was no beneficiary to claim it and no legal mechanism to dissolve it without proof of the beneficiary's death, which no one had ever filed. Arthur Whitmore told me the current value over the phone. I made him repeat it. Then I made him spell it out. Then I sat in that McDonald's parking lot for a very long time without doing anything at all, while the world went about its business around me, and a man in a red vest collected shopping carts in the lot, and a woman in a minivan tried to parallel park and gave up after 3 attempts, and I held my phone in my lap and thought about my father, who I had loved once before he left, and tried to understand how a man could do such a careful, considerate thing as establish a trust for the son he had abandoned, and then fail to make sure the son ever found out about it. I decided I would probably spend the rest of my life not fully understanding it. I decided that was all right. Arthur Whitmore flew me to Philadelphia on a Thursday. I sat in the first-class seat he had bought first class, which I suspect was his quiet way of acknowledging what I had been through, and I wore the cleanest shirt I had in my duffel bag, and I looked out the window at Pennsylvania from the air and thought about the 32 years I had spent building something with my hands in this state, and the 8 months I had spent losing it, and the year I had spent sleeping in a truck and washing my face in fast food bathrooms, and I tried to find the thread that connected all of it into something coherent. The offices of Whitmore and Associates were on the 14th floor of a building in Center City. Arthur Whitmore turned out to be a small, precise man in his late 70s with the kind of posture that suggests he had never once in his life been uncertain about whether to sit up straight. He shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye and said he was sorry it had taken this long. "I've been looking for 4 years," he said. "You'd moved. The addresses I had were outdated. You weren't filing taxes at a fixed address." "No," I said. I wasn't. He didn't ask why. He was a good attorney. He had probably already guessed. The meeting took 4 hours. There were documents to sign. There were processes to understand. There were things he explained about tax implications and transfer timelines and the mechanics of a trust that had been sitting untouched for a third of a century, and I nodded when I was supposed to nod and asked questions when I had them, and through all of it I kept coming back to a single fact that I could not stop turning over. My father had thought of me. Not enough. Not consistently. Not in the ways that had mattered most when I was 7 or 12 or 29. But at some point in 1988, he had sat across from this same careful man and said, "I want to make sure my son has something. Whatever else is true," he had said that. I don't know what to do with that exactly. I'm still working on it. I called my son from the airport. He answered on the second ring, the way he always does when he's in the middle of something. A little distracted. A little apologetic about the distraction. "Dad? Hey. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. And then, because I had spent a year telling everyone everything was fine when it wasn't, I said, "Actually, no. Everything is a lot better than fine, and there are some things I should have told you a year ago that I didn't, and I'm sorry about that." He was quiet for a moment. "Dad, where are you?" "Philadelphia," I said. "I'll explain everything. I wanted to call you first." He flew out the following weekend. My daughter drove up from North Carolina. We sat in the hotel room that Arthur Whitmore had helped me book, a real hotel, not a motel off a highway exit, and I told them everything. The truck, the parking lots, the gym membership, the months of not calling. My son sat very still while I talked. My daughter cried, and then she got angry at me for not telling them, and then she cried again. "You let us think you were fine," she said. "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" I didn't have a good answer for that. I said I thought it was what I was supposed to do. "You're 63, she said. "We're not children. You're allowed to need help." She was right. I've thought about it a lot since then. This habit men of my generation have of deciding that the measure of strength is how much you can carry without telling anyone how heavy it is. I carried it alone for a year. It didn't make me stronger. It just made me lonelier. I should tell you about Gregory. Arthur Whitmore had been discreet on the phone, but in person, with the documents in front of us, he was more direct. The notification process for the trust had been routed through the estate administration handled by my father's second wife's attorney. There was a paper trail. It was not a complete paper trail, but it was enough to raise serious questions about whether the failure to notify me had been accidental. Arthur Whitmore did not make accusations. He laid out facts. He told me what my options were. He told me that a civil suit was possible and that the outcome would depend on documentation and testimony, and that these things were difficult to predict. I thought about it for a week. Then I thought about Gregory, about the way he had looked at me in the hallway outside the courtroom after the divorce was finalized, a brief, level look that I had interpreted at the time as professional neutrality and now understood as something else entirely. I thought about Deborah sitting across from me at that kitchen table saying I've already talked to him about the assets. I thought about the business that had been valued at $40,000. I thought about the deputy standing at my window in the cold asking me questions he couldn't explain. I called my own attorney. Not Phil Garrett. Phil was a good man, but this required someone with a different specialty. I found a firm in Pittsburgh that handled civil litigation. What they found over the following months was not everything. It was enough. Gregory had known about the trust. Not from me, I hadn't known, but from a contact at the estate administration side, someone he had a professional relationship with going back years. He had known there was a trust, had known it had never been properly transferred, and had known that if I ever found out about it, the financial picture of the divorce would look very different. He had not caused the original failure to notify me, but he had known about it and he had said nothing, and in the course of the divorce proceedings, he had actively worked to prevent me from conducting the kind of asset investigation that might have uncovered it. This is called fraud by concealment. There are other legal terms for the specific violations involved. I will not pretend I understand all of them. What I understand is the outcome. Gregory Marsh surrendered his law license in Pennsylvania. This was not a criminal proceeding. The criminal bar was higher, and the evidence, while substantial, was not quite there. But the Pennsylvania Bar's disciplinary board found the evidence sufficient for disbarment. He is no longer a practicing attorney. Deborah received a letter from my litigation attorney explaining that there were grounds to reopen the divorce settlement in light of newly discovered information about concealed assets. Her own attorney, a different one, since Gregory was no longer available, reviewed the letter and advised her to settle. She settled. I will not tell you the specific terms because they are in a sealed agreement, but I will tell you that the $22,000 I had walked out of that marriage with was no longer an accurate accounting of what I had received. I did not feel the satisfaction I thought I would feel. I had spent a year fantasizing, in the darkest parking lots, about exactly this outcome, about Gregory losing his license, about the settlement being reopened, about the specific expression on Deborah's face when she understood that the plan had not worked the way she thought it had worked. When it actually happened, I felt mostly tired, and underneath the tired, something that took me a while to identify as grief. Not for Deborah, or not only for her, for the 30 years, for the version of the marriage that I had believed in, which was real to me even if it hadn't been real to her. You cannot spend 30 years with someone without the loss of them costing you something that cannot be recovered in a settlement. I am working on that too. I bought a house in Chester County, about 12 miles from the cemetery where my father is buried. I don't know why that particular geography felt right. Maybe it was the closest I could get to having a conversation with him that I will never be able to have. The house needed work. Of course it did. I had bought it specifically because it needed work. Because there is nothing better for a man with too many thoughts and 32 years of construction knowledge than a house that needs its porch rebuilt and its roof replaced and its windows reframed. I do most of it myself. The parts I can't do alone, I hire out, and I try to be a fair and straightforward employer, because I remember what it meant to me when the people I worked for were fair and straightforward. My son came out in the spring to help me with the porch. He works in software, knows nothing about construction, was genuinely dangerous with a nail gun for the first 2 days, and by the end of the week had developed a competence and a pride in the work that I recognized from 30 years ago in myself. We talked more in that week than we had in the previous 5 years combined. Not about important things, mostly about the work, about the wood, about whether the railing was level. But the important things were underneath all of it, the way they always are. My daughter calls every Sunday. We have established this as a rule, a correction for the year of silence. I called Phil Garrett, my original divorce attorney, not because I needed anything from him, but because he had been a good man in a bad situation and I wanted him to know things had turned out all right. He sounded genuinely relieved. He said he had thought about my case more than most because it had bothered him, the way things had gone. I told him that was the difference between a good attorney and a bad one, and I meant it. I drove past my old business last fall. It's a chiropractor's office now. Someone bought the building and renovated it, did a decent job on the exterior. I noticed the window framing was right, the kind of attention to detail that most people don't bother with. I sat in my truck across the street for a few minutes and looked at it. 32 years, 12 employees at peak. Decks and roofs and additions, the satisfaction of physical things that stand after you're gone. It's not there anymore, exactly. But I built it. I know what I can do. I drove home and got back to work on the back bedroom, which needs new drywall and a window that actually seals against the cold. It's the kind of work I can do in a day if I start early. I'll be 64 in March, and my knees are not what they were, and I take more breaks than I used to. But the work still means what it always meant. You build something. It stands. Whatever else happens, it stands. That is enough. After everything, that turns out to be enough.